The house was quiet, too quiet, as though it had been holding its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards. But there was nothing else, no laughter, no chatter, no movement. It had been this way for weeks, ever since I found the photograph. Ever since everything had started to unravel. The weight of the silence between me and my stepmother had become unbearable, suffocating. I was sitting in the living room, my legs pulled up to my chest, staring at the empty fireplace. The curtains were still drawn, as they always were. The light outside dimmed by the heavy fabric. It felt like we were living in a world half-formed. A place stuck between the truth and the lies we refused to confront. She walked in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, her usual grace gone. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the walls of the house had closed in on her. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there. Her eyes flickering toward me as if she wasn't sure whether to speak. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, her face an unreadable mask. My chest tight with everything that had been left unsaid. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But it felt like a shout in the silence. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" She froze, her breath catching in her throat. And I saw it, the flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, guilt, regret. She took a step toward me, but it was like the space between us had widened. Like there was a chasm we couldn't cross. "I couldn't," she said, her voice cracking on the word. "I couldn't tell you." "Why?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "Why keep it from me? From him? From everyone?" Her gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, I thought she might turn away. Might disappear into the walls, leaving me to carry the weight of the truth alone. But then, she looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes dark with something I couldn't name. "Because I was afraid," she whispered, her voice so small it almost broke me. "Because I didn't want you to hate me." I stared at her, my chest tight with everything I had been holding in, the anger, the confusion, the hurt. "I don't hate you," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "I hate that you lied to me. I hate that you kept him from me." Her face crumpled then, and for the first time in what felt like forever. She looked like a person, not a woman who had been hiding behind walls of lies and pretense. Her eyes welled with tears, and I saw her try to swallow the pain, the guilt. But it was too much. She couldn't hide it anymore. "I never meant for you to find out like this," she said, her voice breaking. "I never wanted you to see him the way I saw him. Not like this." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to make sense of the words. The mess she had made of everything. I had always believed in the image she had created, the one of a perfect family. Of a life without secrets. But now, everything felt wrong, shattered beyond repair. "You loved him," I said, my voice barely more than a breath. "You loved him more than you ever loved my father." Her eyes widened, and she shook her head, as if trying to deny it, but the truth was there. Raw and exposed. She couldn't hide it anymore. The weight of it was too much. "I did," she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain. "I loved him in a way I shouldn't have. I thought I could live with it, thought I could keep him in the past, but I couldn't. And when you asked about him, when you found the photograph." She trailed off, her face flushing with shame. I stood up then, feeling like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. "How long?" I demanded. "How long were you with him? How long did you keep it from me?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she just stood there, her hands trembling at her sides. And in that moment, I realized how far the lie had gone, how deep it had sunk into the fabric of our lives. Years, she whispered finally, her voice shaking. Years. I felt the floor shift beneath me. Like the world was tilting in a way that made everything feel unstable. And my father? I asked, my voice barely more than a rasp. How could you do this to him? She closed her eyes, her shoulders shaking. And I thought for a moment that she might collapse right there in front of me. I don't know, she said softly. I thought I was protecting him. But I wasn't. I was just lying to him. And to you. The words hung between us, thick with everything we had lost. There was no going back now, no pretending that we could continue the way we had. I had learned the truth, and once the truth was out, there was no way to bury it again. I looked at her for a long time, the woman who had raised me, who had kept so much hidden from me, and for the first time, I didn't know who she was. She wasn't the person I had thought she was. She was a woman with secrets too dark to hold in, too painful to ignore. I think I need some time, I said quietly, not looking at her, but feeling the weight of her gaze on me. I think I need time to think about all of this. She nodded, her eyes still filled with unshed tears, and stepped back slowly, her face crumpling in a way that made my heart ache. I understand, she whispered. Take all the time you need. And as I walked away, the sound of her voice broke through me. It was the first time I had ever heard her sound so broken, so vulnerable. It was the first time I realized she wasn't the strong, perfect woman I had always believed her to be. She was just as lost as I was, just as trapped in the web of lies she had woven. And in that moment, I realized that there was no going back. No fixing what had been broken. The truth had already shattered everything we had. And I didn't know if we could ever put it back together again. The silence between us was suffocating. I had expected anger, or perhaps confusion, but not this quiet, almost unbearable weight. My stepmother stood across the room, her face pale, her lips trembling slightly as though the words we had exchanged were too much for her to hold in. She had always been so composed, so perfect. But now I saw her for the first time as someone who had been hiding not just from my father, but from me, from everyone. I wanted to shout at her, to demand more answers. I wanted to tear everything apart, this house, the perfect facade, the life we had been living. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing with 1,000 questions that I couldn't articulate. She shifted, taking a step back, as though trying to put distance between us. You shouldn't have asked me, she said softly, her voice almost pleading. Some things are better left unknown. I shook my head, unable to process the rawness of her words. You didn't just hide it from me, I whispered. You lied to me. For years. Her eyes flickered with something, regret, guilt, fear, but she didn't speak. The silence between us deepened, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing her not as a stepmother, but as a woman who had carried the weight of a secret for too long. A woman who had made choices that had destroyed everything in her path. I didn't want you to know, she said finally, her voice breaking, her gaze dropping to the floor. I thought I could protect you. I thought if you didn't know, you wouldn't get hurt. I laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the stillness of the room. Protect me? From the truth? From my own father? She flinched, her hands curling into fists at her sides. I did it for him, she whispered. For both of you. I thought if I kept it hidden, everything would be okay. But now I see how wrong I was. I see what it's done to you. I took a step forward, my eyes never leaving hers. You can't protect us from the truth. And you shouldn't have tried. Her face crumpled then, the mask of control slipping for the first time. The tears that had been gathering in her eyes finally spilled over. Her body shaking with the release of emotions she had been holding back for so long. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she choked out, her voice raw with guilt. "I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to make things right." I stood there, my chest tight with the weight of her words, but I didn't know how to respond. How could I forgive her? How could I just let it go? The man I had called my father, the man who had been everything to me, had been kept in the dark. And for what? To protect him from the truth? "Did you ever love him?" I asked quietly, the question slipping out before I could stop it. She didn't answer at first, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I thought I did. But love doesn't make things easier. Love doesn't protect you from the consequences of your actions." I turned away, feeling a wave of frustration wash over me. How could she be so naive? How could she think she was protecting us by hiding the truth? I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt us. How much her lies had destroyed the trust that had once been the foundation of our family. But the truth was too much for me, too. It was too much for all of us. And I knew that even if I confronted her, even if I asked her all the questions that had been burning inside me, the damage was already done. The secrets had already taken root. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what had been broken. "I don't know what to do now," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know how to fix this." She looked at me, her face softening, and for a moment, I saw the woman she had been before the secrets, before the lies. Before everything had been shattered. She reached out toward me, but I stepped back, the distance between us growing even wider. "I don't know either," she said quietly. "But maybe, someday, we'll find a way to move forward. Together." I shook my head, the words catching in my throat. "I don't know if we can." And with that, I turned away from her, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if I could ever look at her the same way again. But as I walked away, I realized something. The truth had already done its damage. It had already torn everything apart. And no matter how much we tried to rebuild, the cracks would always be there. The photograph, the secrets, the lies, they had been burned away. But they would never be erased from our lives. And as I left the room, the silence between us felt heavier than it ever had before. Because once the truth had been spoken, once the damage had been done, there was no going back. I couldn't bring myself to face her again. The way she looked at me after I'd said my father's name, it had shattered something inside me. Something fragile that I hadn't known I was holding on to. There had been a flicker of something in her eyes when I said his name. Something that broke the illusion we had all been living under. It wasn't just guilt, it was fear. Fear that I was finally seeing the truth. I stayed in my room, pretending to read. Pretending to care about anything other than the knots tightening in my chest. But the truth kept slipping through the cracks, seeping into everything. She had lied. She had kept him, my father, in the dark for so long. But what about me? What about what she had done to me? The silence in the house was unbearable. And every minute that passed without my father coming home felt like a weight pressing down on me. What would happen when he found out? Would he forgive her? Would he understand? Or would the cracks between us deepen until there was nothing left to hold on to? That evening, my stepmother tried again. She came to my room, her knock soft and hesitant. As though she wasn't sure if she had the right to be there. I heard her voice through the door before I opened it, soft but urgent. "Please, can we talk?" I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, heart racing. What could we possibly say to each other? Everything had already been said, or at least, everything that mattered. I opened the door. She stood there, wringing her hands, her face pale. Her eyes red from crying. For a moment, we just stood there. The space between us filled with everything we had been avoiding. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything." I wanted to tell her it was too late for apologies. That I couldn't just forgive her for the years of lies, the years of pretending. I wanted to scream at her, to ask how she could have done this. How she could have kept us both in the dark for so long. But instead, I just stood there, silent. The words wouldn't come. "Please," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you to understand. I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted to hurt you." I finally spoke, my voice cold, like the walls I had built around myself. "You didn't just hurt me. You hurt him. You hurt both of us." Her shoulders slumped and she closed her eyes. As if the weight of my words was more than she could bear. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to tell him. And I didn't know how to tell you either. But I thought if I could just keep it hidden, keep everything perfect, maybe it wouldn't break us. Perfect. The word stuck with me, like a jagged stone lodged in my chest. Perfect. It had always been the image we lived by, the perfect home, the perfect family. But perfect was a lie. A mask that had cracked long ago, and now, it was too late to fix it. "Why did you keep me out of it?" I asked, my voice quieter now, but the hurt still there, raw. "Why did you think I didn't need to know? Why did you protect him and not me?" She didn't answer right away, her hands trembling as she tried to find the right words. "I didn't want to hurt you," she repeated, like a mantra. "I thought if you didn't know, if you didn't see it, maybe you could still have your father, the way he was. The way you thought he was." I took a step back, the weight of her words sinking into me like stones dropped into a deep well. She had never believed I could handle the truth, never thought I would see the cracks. The lies that had been carefully woven into the fabric of our lives. And now, here we were, standing at the edge of everything we had built. And there was no going back. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way." The words hung in the air between us, and I saw the pain in her eyes. But it wasn't just regret. It was something darker, guilt, yes, but also resignation. She knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. Not between us, and certainly not between her and my father. "I didn't want to destroy you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't want to destroy him. But I did. And I don't know how to fix it." I turned away from her then, my heart heavy with the weight of everything she had just admitted. She was right. There was no fixing it. The house that had once felt like a home now felt empty, hollow. Like it was just a shell of what it had been. The lies had taken root too deeply. The truth was too painful to bear. As I walked away, I heard her call my name softly, but I didn't turn back. There was nothing left to say. No more apologies could fix what had been broken. And no matter how much she wanted to protect me, no matter how much she thought she was doing the right thing, the truth had already done its damage. And now, we would all have to live with it. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The house seemed to hum with the weight of everything we had left unspoken. The silence between my stepmother and me pressing down on the walls, suffocating in its stillness. The truth had been laid bare, and yet, nothing had been resolved. There were no neat answers, no promises of things being okay again. There was just the messy reality of what had been hidden and what I couldn't unsee. I spent the entire night sitting by the window, staring out at the empty street below. The dim light of the street lamps casting long shadows. Every so often, I'd hear a car pass, the sound muffled by the distance, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside was still turning, still moving forward. But inside the house, everything was frozen. It was like time had stopped when I said my father's name to her. When I watched her face crack for the first time. I don't know when I finally fell asleep. But the sound of footsteps woke me just as the sun began to rise. I opened my eyes to see my father standing at the door, looking at me with concern. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me for a long time. His gaze heavy with the questions he didn't ask. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. Worry? Maybe, or something deeper that I didn't want to acknowledge. I didn't answer at first. What could I say? The truth had already come tumbling out, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. I wanted to tell him everything, to tell him about the photograph, the lies, about what I had discovered. But I couldn't. I couldn't break him like that. "I'm fine," I said, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. I hated that I was lying, but I couldn't see another way. "Just tired." He nodded, still standing in the doorway, his eyes searching mine for something I couldn't give him. He didn't ask any more questions, just sighed softly and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stayed there for a long time, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and regret. How had it all come to this? How had we all allowed the lies to fester until they had consumed everything? I thought of my stepmother, of the way she had looked when I confronted her, broken, vulnerable, a woman who had spent so long hiding from the truth that she no longer knew how to face it. And then, a new thought crept into my mind. One that terrified me even more than the anger I had felt earlier. What if it was already too late for her to fix it? What if there was no way back for any of us? That day, everything felt out of reach. My father went about his usual routine, lost in his work, not noticing the tension that still hung thick in the air. My stepmother avoided me, her movements careful and calculated, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. We all danced around each other, pretending that the truth hadn't changed everything. That evening, after dinner, my stepmother came to find me in the living room. I had been sitting in silence, trying to force myself to focus on something. Anything other than what had happened. She stood in the doorway, hesitating, her figure framed by the soft glow from the hallway. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice low and uncertain. She looked tired, worn down by the weight of the same things we had left unsaid. But I could see the remnants of the woman I had once known, the one who could make everything seem perfect, even when it wasn't. "I don't know what to say to you," I said, my voice almost breaking. "I don't know how to make this right. How to forgive you." She nodded, her eyes filling with something like sorrow. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly. "I don't deserve that." There was a long silence between us, filled with everything that had gone wrong. I could see the tears in her eyes. The grief that had been buried so deep inside her for so long. She was unraveling before me, and I didn't know what to do. How could I help her, when I couldn't even help myself? "I was trying to protect you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I didn't protect anyone, did I?" I shook my head, the bitterness in my chest rising again. You were never protecting me, I said, the words sharp like knives. You were protecting yourself. She didn't respond, but I could see the way her shoulders slumped. The weight of everything, of the lies, of the secrets, of the years she had spent hiding from the truth, pressed down on her. I don't know what to do with any of this, I said finally. The exhaustion in my voice overwhelming. I don't know how to go back. Her face crumpled, and she took a step toward me, but I stepped back, instinctively. The space between us had grown too wide for her to close, too deep for us to cross. I wanted to reach out to her, wanted to fix everything, but I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. Maybe we can't go back, she whispered, her voice thick with regret. But maybe, in time, we can move forward. Together. I wanted to believe her, but something told me that the past was already too broken. The damage too deep. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her everything would be okay. But I couldn't. The truth had already shattered everything we had. And I wasn't sure I could ever put the pieces back together again. As I left the room, the sound of her voice still echoed in my mind, but it wasn't the same. It was quieter now, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something else to break. And this time, I wasn't sure I wanted to wait. The next few days felt like a slow unraveling. The threads of everything we had built coming undone with each passing moment. I watched my father going about his routine as though nothing had changed. His smile still as warm, still as trusting. But I saw the cracks now, the ones that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. And I couldn't ignore them. My stepmother, on the other hand, seemed to be holding her breath. Waiting for something that neither of us could define. She went through the motions of our daily life. But her eyes were always somewhere else, distant, lost in a space where I couldn't reach her. The woman I had once thought of as a second mother had become a stranger. Someone I couldn't understand, someone who had buried herself so deeply in her lies that she didn't know how to break free. I couldn't stop thinking about the night I had confronted her. The way her voice had broken when I said my father's name. It was a crack in her mask, a fleeting moment of vulnerability, of guilt. But it wasn't enough to change anything. It wasn't enough to fix what had been broken between us. That afternoon, when I walked into the kitchen, I found her standing by the sink. Her back to me. She didn't turn when I entered, but I could feel the tension in the room. Thick and suffocating. It was as if she knew the conversation we were about to have. But she was avoiding it, hoping it would go away if she just stayed silent. I took a deep breath, the words I had been holding in for days finally rising to the surface. I don't know what to do anymore, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I can't pretend everything is fine when it's not. She turned slowly, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her face pale and drawn. There was no mask this time. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, her voice barely audible. I never wanted any of this. I stood there, my chest tight with everything I wanted to say but couldn't. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? I asked, my voice rising. Why didn't you tell me what was really going on? She looked down at the counter, her hands shaking as she wiped it absent-mindedly. Because I didn't want to lose you, she whispered. I didn't want to destroy everything we had. Everything we had? I repeated, the anger I had been holding back finally breaking free. What about everything you destroyed by lying to me? By lying to him? Her face crumpled, and she stepped back, as if my words were too much for her to bear. I thought I was protecting you both, she said, the tears starting to fall. But she didn't wipe them away. But I see now that I was just keeping us all in the dark. I see now that I destroyed everything trying to protect it. I stood there, my chest heavy with the weight of everything she had just admitted. You don't get to decide what's best for me, I said, my voice trembling. You don't get to decide what I can or can't handle. She took a shaky breath, her eyes filled with regret. I know, she said softly. I know I've failed you. And I know I can't fix it. But I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The words hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I ever could. The damage had been done, and no apology could undo what had already been broken. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched out, each of us lost in our own thoughts. In the wreckage of what had once been. Finally, I spoke again, my voice quieter now, more uncertain. What do we do now? She wiped her eyes, and when she looked up at me, there was something in her expression that I hadn't seen before, resignation, maybe. Or acceptance. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what happens next. I didn't know either. The truth was out now. But the pieces didn't fit together the way I thought they would. I wanted closure, I wanted an explanation, but all I had were fragments. The lies, the photographs, the woman in them, nothing had been explained. Nothing had been fixed. It was just raw, unspoken truth hanging in the air. I turned and walked out of the kitchen without saying another word. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. The person I had been before, the person who trusted her, who trusted them, was gone. And I wasn't sure if I could ever get her back. The house felt colder now, emptier, like the walls were closing in on me. My father would come home eventually, and I would have to face him. But I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to tell him everything I knew. Everything she had kept from him, from both of us. But the truth had already broken us. There was no going back from that. And as the night drew in, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house would never be the same again. Neither would I, neither would any of us.